Morning, folks. What's going on? I started the space a couple minutes early, figured I'd let people come in and whatnot. But the reality is, I'm kind of excited for this one. It's going to be a very heavy knowledge session. So take this as like the warning that, maybe other people aren't going to hear right away. Get your notebooks, get your Notion open, get your Obsidian open, get ready to take notes. A lot is going to be shared in this one in particular. And hopefully it's going to answer quite a few questions that I get on the regular and hopefully, address those. But the information and takeaways today should probably be definitely on the higher end of some of the spaces that we've done as of recent. Essentially, the whole idea is this. I had a one-on-one call not too long ago. It was a really good, interesting one-on-one call with somebody, and they definitely had some issues after they landed a job in tech. But also, it kind of made me think about what's the entire junior developer software development plan, right? Like if you're trying to become a junior software developer, what is the entire game plan to get you from A to B, but not just in getting the job. It's not just the kumbaya spaces where people are just talking about getting a job and nothing really actionable. I want it to be very actionable, but on top of that, it's like, all right, you got the job. What do you do next? And so we're going to kind of cover both today. We don't have a ton of time, right? There's a lot that we got to kind of go over. If you see at the top, I've pinned in the space what I'm calling the chapters for today's space. We're going to cover a lot, right? And so if you're the type of person that needs to view that, I think that's really great. View the chapter so you get an idea of what we're going to be talking about today. Or if you're the type of person that's trying to get ideas for content and you like taking my stuff too, hey, go for it too. I don't care how somebody hears the message. I just care that they hear it, right? So if taking that and making some tweets about it, making some posts and videos helps you with that, go for it too, right? It's there for everybody. So run with it. But make sure like whatever you put out, it's quality and it's helping people, right? And I'll support it all the way. All right. I've also got quite a few questions that come in before this space. I'm keeping track of my notifications. So if there's a question that you want to ask it. And I will try my level best to answer that or rope that into what it is the overall discussion is going to be about. I've got a couple questions already written on the side that were asked that I know I'm going to hit. And it's going to be through some of the chapters that I already have listed out. But on top of that, you can just kind of ask them in the chat or whatever it may be. I'll probably bring some people up later on to kind of go over stuff as well. But really, my heavy focus is making sure, at least early on, you're getting like the real value and interest that you need. Now, with that also being said, I don't always record my spaces. Very rarely do I record them, if I'm being honest with you. But this one is definitely being recorded. So if you think this is going to be valuable, or if anytime during the space you hear something of value and you know it could help somebody else out, or you want to review it later, retweet it, share it, like it, whatever it may be, tag somebody if you think they need to hear that in particular, because I think that, the whole purpose of today is helping people get to that next step. All right. So let's kind of start this off. We're going to not gloss over one thing. So chapter number 1 obviously is going to be about technical skills. This is the area where I feel like a lot of people, when they come to these spaces or they ask advice, they're basically thinking, how do I avoid the bigger subject of being very technical in order to get my first job in tech? The reality is you can't skip the technical skills. You have to have the skills. There's no point in landing an interview if you can't pass the interview. There's no point in going into a technical interview if you're going to just completely bomb it because you've not prepared properly, right? You have to have the technical skills. And this one thing really stood out to me. I was having a call with somebody and they had gone through a technical interview. They bombed it. It went terrible. And so they were asking for like help afterwards. And so we jumped on the call. And throughout that call, I said, what did you do poorly on this interview? And so they were talking about how they didn't really understand how to use external libraries and that they were just used to basically the stuff that they've experienced through tutorials, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, cool. So you had this interview 2 weeks ago. What have you done since then to combat this? And they just kind of stared at the screen for a second. And I'm like, if you know this is a problem area, if you've already identified that this is a weakness, why are we not addressing it at this point? Why are you not going further? Which brings me to my next point, kind of encompassing not just getting the job but thriving in the job. One of the one-on-ones I had very recently was with somebody who had their role for 2.5 years, and I think throughout this space I'm going to be referencing this one call in particular quite often because there's a lot in this one call that made me, number one, want to do the space, but number two, really try and help people kind of get past these roadblocks. But they mentioned how they've been in this role for 2.5 years, which is a substantial amount of time, right? And they're now on the chopping block, essentially, where their lead engineer basically told them that they were giving them a task, and this task was going to determine whether or not they were going to keep them in the company. And as we're talking, it's obvious to me why this engineer said this, but everything leading up to this point, in my opinion, a lot of it was a fault of the lead engineer not being proactive, but also a fault of the junior engineer not noticing these things. I mean, it's both hands, right? But the one thing that we noticed was this person in particular was feeling intimidation on larger code bases, which I can get. But at the same time, too, there were things that they were noticing early on that they never took action on. One prime example of this, we spoke about it. This person said early on they were very intimidated by the because they use Python. They were intimidated by proxies. They didn't know how to use it. They didn't know what to do with it. And so when I asked them, I was like, "Well, I'm sure now you know. It's been 2.5 years." And this person said, "Oh, I still don't know anything about proxies." If it's been 2.5 years, why have you not taken a day, some hours here and there to learn more about it at this point? If you keep running away from the items that you're intimidated by or don't know anything about, it's almost impossible for you to progress as a software developer. There's so much, it's so difficult to overcome those obstacles if you're not addressing the pain points, right? That's what this industry is all about. I can tell you right now, and this is one thing that I said even in the call. They said very often I don't really know a lot about what I'm working on. And I said 50% of the time I'm working on something that I only know probably 30% of, and then the rest of it is discovering, researching, going through, reading documentation, making, breaking, adjusting. That's how we work as developers. Especially that's how I work as a developer. I don't know 100% of everything that I get assigned a task on. Sure, there's going to be some tasks that I'm like, oh, I know everything about this component. I know everything about this feature. I built this feature. But there's a vast majority of the time where we're building something brand new, or we're taking something on from another team, or maybe one of my coworkers worked on this, but I didn't work on this. So there's a large gap in that. And so if you're not going further and towards the items that are confusing you or intimidating you, it's really hard to progress as a software developer. So, with all that being said, you cannot skip the technical skills for the role. You have to definitely build up, progress, and grow as a developer, especially the technical parts, right? Especially if your goal to get a job as a junior software developer, you have to invest time within the technical skill area. So that's not just following tutorials, right? Because tutorials, they're great to build a foundational base. Like it's great to gain some beginning level knowledge, but the reality is tutorials take you down a predefined path that is bump free. You are not having errors. You are not having those issues where this library is not working with that one. You're not having issues of versions being outdated. There's stuff that's not already pre-figured out for you. I can tell you, I know some of the biggest, largest YouTubers in the world, right? It's a very big pleasure of mine to have them in my social circle. I can tell you from conversations, some of them literally take a week, 2 weeks to build that tutorial video. They are not just sitting down in real time and typing out this entire application in one go without having to Google a single thing, without having a single syntax error. None of that happens. So if that's a belief that you may have, dispel it right now. I'm telling you right now, they've already researched it before. To be honest, 99% of them have the code on one monitor and they're coding on the secondary monitor right next to it. So they have the code to reference in real time. They're not just coming out of the top of their head, building out this entire application with nothing by them without a single error. Okay. So just dispel that. You have to have technical skills if you want to get these roles. All right. So now that we've established that you're going to dig deep and you're going to actually build projects instead of just going down the path of tutorials, you need to understand when you build projects, you're going to get errors. You're going to have confusion. You're going to want to flip the table, and that's completely okay. I think the biggest thing with that is, if we're being completely honest, you need to understand how to research to get your answers. This is sometimes the biggest hurdle that a lot of beginners have, because I'll even see it sometimes in our Discord or in my DMs where questions will come in and it's like, this is the most Googleable question in the world. Like, of all questions you can Google, this is there. Oftentimes I will get a question about an error, and what do? I literally just Google the error exactly as it's read, instead of trying to come up with a different way to do it, just to see what pops up. And oftentimes that yields the answer. You know what's one of the biggest things that a lot of beginners end up missing on, if we're being completely honest, and this is something that I'm trying to work on right now to develop a solution for. A lot of my interns have this issue. A lot of the juniors have this issue. They absolutely are terrible at debugging. You need to start thinking about, you have a code base and it has an error. What do you do to find that error? This is a big one, if I'm being honest. And that's going to really grow you as a technical developer. So when you're building projects and you have errors, that's where a lot of that skill set comes in and allows you to progress. All right. So we got technical skills, right? So we know you're going to start developing more technical skills instead of trying to think about ways to avoid that, because there's no way to avoid that. You have to have it in this industry. Second chapter of this, researching the market, right? I talk about this a lot because it feels like nobody does this and it drives me crazy. And then when I get on one-on-one calls, every single time I jump on a one-on-one call, their mouth drops whenever we do this, right? Every single boot camp around, right? I'd say 90% of them, there's a 10% that probably don't, but 90%, they all teach the MERN stack. Every popular YouTuber, they teach the MERN stack. They teach JavaScript front and back, right? And there's nothing wrong with the MERN stack. In certain markets, the MERN stack is king, right? Like there's lots of opportunities in it. You'll get jobs in it, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not all markets. There's a vast majority of markets where there are no opportunities or mild amounts of opportunities when it comes to the MERN stack. And you would know this if you research the market. Prime example. I lived in Memphis, Tennessee for almost 20 years, right? Love Memphis. And Memphis, Tennessee, if you knew .NET, that was job security. Simple as that. Almost every company around used .NET. But if you went to some of the coding boot camps in town, it was MERN. Even though there was zero Node jobs, there's zero MERN jobs. JavaScript front and back doesn't happen in that city. There's no mobile development jobs there, right? But you'd find boot camps that are teaching mobile development because that's what people want versus what the market is demanding, right? Especially when they're thinking in the mindset of, we need to earn money and get dollars. They're not necessarily always concerned with placement. They're concerned with what gets people through the door, right? But if you knew .NET, C#.NET, you had six-figure jobs or at least job security, in that industry. When I moved to Dallas, Texas 2.5 years ago, one of the first things I started doing was networking with recruiters and hiring managers and software developers. And I remember talking to several different recruiters because Dallas from Memphis is like a 6-hour drive, right? It's not a crazy, crazy distance compared to New York to California. In my mind, it's similar markets. So I'm talking to these recruiters. I'm saying, you probably have a very large demand for .NET. And they're like, actually, not really. We have some. I'm not going to say we don't have any, but really here, Java is king. I was like, whoa, Java is king. That threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting that answer. And then we start researching it and we see it. But then I go to meetups, right? And I start hosting meetups in Dallas. We built an amazing community here. And when I'm going to these meetups, I'm meeting 100 Dev students, right? I love 100 Devs. I love Leon. Leon's like my brother. We talk a lot. We have a lot of conversations. We're talking about a lot of stuff right now. And I meet all these 100 Dev students, and it's great meeting them, right? And as we're meeting, I'm asking them all the same thing, like, what are you studying? What are you learning? What are you doing? And I remember one person saying, I've been learning how to code for like 2.5 years, and I still haven't been able to land a single interview. I was like, whoa, all right, what is your tech stack? And they said the same thing, of course, the MERN stack. And I said, well, that's interesting because everything that I've been researching thus far in Dallas has showed that there are almost no jobs in MERN. And so in real time, I just pull out my phone and I do the first stage of researching my market. And I get on the job boards, LinkedIn Jobs, Indeed, Monster, et cetera, whatever it may be. And whatever is popular in your area, if you're not in the US, you know what a job board is. You can figure that out and find that out. And this is just the preliminary search. And I just start typing in. This is the thing that always blows people's minds whenever we do this. I'll get on LinkedIn Jobs on a one-on-one call, and I will type in Node, Java, .NET, C#, all these technologies one by one. And we will just see how many jobs pop up for that technology. This, again, it's a basic preliminary search. But what happened when we typed in Node? We found 200 jobs in Dallas. What happened when we typed in Java? We found 35,000. So am I going to spend all this time, effort, and motivation to put into a technology that only has 200 available jobs that I'm just going to be competing with every single bootcamp student and junior dev in the world? Or do I want to go where there's 35,000 opportunities in my area and have a higher likelihood of actually landing something? And I remember .NET was like 7,000 or 8,000. So there was definitely .NET jobs, but still 7,000 to 35,000. We're talking about an 8x difference. That's a massive difference, right? So these are important things that you need to be thinking about. What am I doing to research my market? Researching your market entails checking out your job boards. So going through all the job boards, researching them, seeing what's available, what's not, where the demand is. Not just taking that for everything. Second part is checking company career pages. I've told people this before in a video, and I'll say this again. If you're searching and applying for jobs, especially at the junior level, you're probably not doing it the right way, and there's a specific reason why. Whenever it comes to hiring a junior developer on a team, two things happen. The first is, well, let me take one step back before saying this. When it comes to the job boards like the Indeed, LinkedIn's, etc., every job you see, you haven't entered your credit card information to see that job, right? Because you're not the thing that those websites monetize, meaning companies pay to post those job listings, right? So you're not paying to see them, they're being paid to post them. For the vast majority, there's a very, very small to almost zero incentive to post a junior dev job on a job board because they know it's going to get 1,000 applications within minutes without even trying. Heck, even senior dev jobs are getting that, right? So why pay to post that on a public forum when every single bootcamp student, college student, beginner that learned how to code is going to apply to it? They don't. So they do two things. Whenever a team is hiring, they do two things. First is the managers of that team will kind of mention to the team members, hey, we're going to be hiring a junior dev. Do y'all know anybody? Do you have an idea of somebody that we should be looking at or paying attention to, et cetera, et cetera? Those referrals will really play a large role there, right? So networking, which is one of the chapters we're going to be talking about later on, that plays a big pivotal role there. The second thing that they do is they post it on their company career page because it doesn't cost them anything to post it there. So if you're only looking at job boards for jobs, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. You're not going to find a bulk of the opportunities, especially at the junior level. When you start getting experience in the industry, completely different ballgame. You're going to find that everywhere. But company career pages specifically, they post it there. And they know going into it, hey, we're going to get way less applicants for this role, and that's completely okay. The applicants that we do get, I know for a fact, are going to be ones that found us because they're doing the research. They've learned about our company, obviously, by going through our company website to find their career page, et cetera, et cetera. The quality of hire is probably going to be higher than someone that's just mass spamming LinkedIn Easy Apply, right? So they're willing to give up the number of applicants because in their mind, there's going to be a higher quality of applicant since they did the research to find the role, right? Which is great for you because you're competing against way less people for the role, right? And so, in my opinion, especially in today's market, there's a lot of competition for these roles, especially at the junior level. And that's completely okay. It just means you need to be a higher level quality candidate when you're going for this, and things will go the way that you need them to go. All right. So researching the market is paramount. So make sure you're putting in your due diligence, having conversations, which takes me to chapter number 3 of this. If you're referencing the chapters at the top, this is number 3. Meetups. That's also going in part with researching the market. You should be going to meetups. And I know that every single time I say this, especially on Twitter, someone's like, well, there's no meetups in my area. There's no developers in my area. You could be the change that you want to see, right? If you want to meet up in your area and there isn't one, I can guarantee you there's somebody else in your area that wants to meet up as well. Do that meetup for the community. That's basically how I started. You don't have to be a conference level speaker to do meetups. You can bring speakers to the meetup and have people meet around that. Or you could do a study jam where you're just learning a topic and kind of doing that together. Do those have massive turnouts? No, but you don't need 30 people, 40 people, 50 people at a meetup for it to be a success. Some of my early meetups earlier on, it was just me and 3 people at a coffee shop, and that's completely okay. That's a great meetup as far as I'm concerned. You can have great conversation. You can make some great friends that are interested in the same thing that you're interested in as well. But go to meetups, and that goes into the researching the market part. Talk to the developers that are working there, like working in the industry. at that meetup saying, if you had to hit the industry today, what would be the tech stack that you applied to jobs with or used in order to get your next opportunity? See what they say, right? Start taking that like feedback in as well and building up the ideas of what it is that you should be using. That's often a great gauge for what it is, but also understand something. When it comes to meetups, it's a great place to get multiple areas of feedback, right? If they have a Slack channel, Discord, that's a great place to like talk with people and kind of connect, right? But developers are great at developing. They're not necessarily great about understanding the hiring process all the time. And the reason why I say this in particular is almost every single resume review call I've ever done, people have always said over and over again, I've had so many developers review this resume, they say this is perfect. And my response to that is always, I will reserve my comments until we see the resume together. Then I will tell you what I think. I have never had somebody give me that phrase or that sentence, and then at the end of the call, with them not walking away with pages of notes of what to fix on their resume, right? And it's because developers are focused on code throughout their day. Fixing resumes and LinkedIn's, that's not something that they do on their day-to-day, right? And the reality is probably the shift has happened in the last 2 years where historically it's always been a developer's market. They've never had to advocate for their skill set, right? Now we're in a market where it's no longer a developer's market, it's a hiring market. They have their choices to go about. Because back then, man, you could cough and make a sound that sounded like the word JavaScript and you were in interviews without even trying. Now there are people at all levels that have really increased their quality of developer and increased their quality of who they are as a candidate to where now, man, they're popping up all over the place. Like I'm seeing junior devs that have really pushed past basic tutorials and have done amazing things to where they're a standout candidate. They're the ones landing jobs. So this is something you got to think about, right? So don't always take any advice you hear as like, this is what I'm running with. Take all the advice, even advice you're getting in this space today. Do not take this as a blanket. Danny said this, I'm gonna do this. Let it allow you to spark an idea. Allow yourself to research this afterwards. And if you still think this applies to you, run with it. If you think, hey, this advice probably works in a different market, but not mine, I'm not going to use this, that's phenomenal. I love the fact that you're viewing and critically analyzing each piece of advice to make sure it works for you. And I think that's perfect. You should not just be doing this with people that you talk with. It should be the media that you consume, tutorials, etc. Do it all. When it comes to like YouTube videos to learn from, that YouTube video was worth everything that you didn't pay for it because it's free, right? So there's no barrier to entry. So you have some great developers on there and you have some developers that may not necessarily be the best that are teaching technical concepts that probably use bad practices as well. So it's something to think about in the long term, okay? So always audit your information sources. So when you're at meetups, you should also be doing something in particular, and that's networking. You should be learning. You should be going to meetups. There's only net positives by going to meetups. I can tell you right now, I owe my entire career probably to the connections that I made at meetups. They've been phenomenal for years and years and years. It's the reason why I still do meetups to this day. Even though it's a headache in organizing them, it's always stressful getting the events together and getting speakers together. But to be honest, I can't see myself anytime soon ever stopping that. It's given me more than I can ever think about. And so because of that, I think meetups are probably one of the most valuable things that you could be doing. Especially if you're the introverted person, think about it. You get to control your exposure to everybody in that situation. Like when you're done and your social battery is gone, you can walk out of the room, right? If you're an extrovert, even better for you, you got a bunch of people you could talk with. Or if you're the type of person that's too intimidated to make connections, talk to one person, talk to 2 people, 3 people, and get out of there if it's too much for you, or take a step back and then try again. But think about it. You're in a space that has low risk because they want to be there. They want to talk to other developers and they want to connect with other people, right? They want that. So they almost want you to talk to them. Do it. Like, where else can you network where they want to have a conversation with you? Other times where you may network, they may not want to know anything about you and you're doing a cold open, which we'll talk about in a moment. But there, everybody is warm. Everybody's excited. Everybody wants to be a part of something. They want to geek out about the same thing that subject matter is there for that day. So is it a React meetup? I'd be walking up to people. And if you check out my YouTube channel, I literally have a video that I recorded. I went to a meetup. I think it was like the second week I lived in Dallas, Texas. And it was a meetup on Firebase. And I literally was walking around and recording. I knew 0 people in that room. And I was walking around and recording every conversation that I went into in the beginning, right? So I walked up to people like, oh, this was a great meetup at Firebase, you know, what did you think about it? And I walked up to somebody else like, Firebase sucks, doesn't it? And I went to somebody else, Firebase is amazing, isn't it? Just to show you variety. But it was true to my personality. I was cracking jokes, we were having a good time. I ended up making a bunch of connections, and that's how my network started growing. That's a great way to kind of get in there. And every developer I met was somebody that worked at a company or somebody that was established somewhere else. And it gave me a lot of insight into the Dallas market, especially early on, since I knew no one in the city. I had 0 connections when I moved to Dallas. So think about that. Go to meetups. Now, when you're at meetups, you need something to talk about. That brings us to chapter number 4, projects that are actually worth talking about, right? This is the biggest hurdle with junior devs. To give you an idea, in Dallas, I run a meetup group called Dallas Software Developers. It's me and several other volunteers. Like, we just donate our time helping out. And we do a cohort here, right? And in that cohort, we have them build projects that are actually worth talking about. And a lot of people get confused by that. But what's funny is when our cohort graduated, we combined that graduation with a meetup so that way they can get a night of like extra exposure with everybody there. It was really successful, right? And as I'm talking to these developers, I remember a conversation with a technical lead at Uber, right? He was at our meetup. And I'm telling him about the projects that they built. And he said, wow, this is the first time I've heard of a junior dev with a project that's actually worth having a conversation about. That was his immediate takeaway. He said, if a junior dev came in my interview with these projects, these would be the kinds of things I would love to geek out about. But what are they coming in there with? The basic applications that you see every junior dev make, right? To-do list app, which I think is a phenomenal application to build and learn concepts from. That is not the application I want to build and walk into an interview with, hoping that it opens the door for me, right? It's like the project you believe every single junior dev in the world is going to make. You don't believe that every single experienced developer is going to be leading with that. The second thing is, when it comes to these projects, you need to have a project that's solving a problem, delivering a solution, and it allows you to talk about that solution. If that's the project you're going into that conversation with, that's going to be an interview that you're going to like run with every single time. I'm telling you right now, you will be utterly shocked at how much value that conversation will produce when you're approaching your projects with that mindset. The other thing that you need to be thinking about when it comes to your project is you need a project that's going to allow you to talk about it in a technical capacity in such a way that employers are going to want to have more conversations with you, because the reality is no one hires you based on that project. Maybe 1% of the time, but the reality is no one's going to be like, oh, I can't believe Carlos built this project. I need to have a conversation with him. Or Michael built this amazing tool. I need to have a conversation. That's very rare. Very rarely does that ever happen, right? But what it does is this gives you ammunition to utilize within the interview process, when networking, heck, even when going to a meetup. That's something that you can talk to other people about, right? It's giving you more ammunition. That's the purpose of these projects. It's not just because I want to build a project to build a project. You need certain things. And so this is why I often tell people, I do not actually care about the quantity of projects that you have, but I do actually care about the quality of said projects. And if you're not thinking about the quality, you're doing yourself a massive disservice. And so that's something you need to be thinking about. And here's the other thing. You need to remove all of the buts from the conversation. And what I mean by that is, you should not be handing somebody your project and saying, oh, I'm working on this, but it's not done yet. Oh, this part is not complete as of yet because I've been working on ABC, but it will be done soon. Those shouldn't be coming up. You shouldn't necessarily feel the need to immediately start deducing or reducing the value of those projects that you're making, right? So don't try to lower expectations when you hand it over. You've got your entire life to build a project that you deem worthy to showcase. Build one that's on that caliber and level of what you think. And again, remember, this kind of goes back to chapter number one. It's got to have the technical skills. So stop like trying to shortcut this to build something. You got to have the technical skills. It's got to look right, and remove yourself from the equation. This is what I often do with projects. Oftentimes I'll build something and I'm proud of it because I built it, right? But if I were to remove myself from the situation and imagine that my friend showed this to me and he's like, I want to start applying to jobs. Here's the project that I made. What do you think about it? That's when I can start looking at it more critically now. I'm not looking at it as, well, Danny built this, so I should feel proud that I'm Danny. Instead, it should be like, oh, this design doesn't really work well. And I'm not a designer. I'll be the first one to tell you that. I can barely match the color scheme of my clothes, much less the color scheme on a website. But regardless, I make sure that it looks somewhat decent. There's so many templates out there. There's so many design ideas out there. You can use Dribbble, all awards. You can talk in a Discord. You can get feedback from people. Utilize those avenues, right? But I make sure that things look right. They function well. I make sure like the call to action to XYZ looks proper. If there's a form on the page, I want it to function the right way. Those are things that I'm thinking about. And so that's kind of what I want to make sure I prioritize when I'm looking at the project from a critical standpoint, as opposed to, well, I built this and I don't want to do more. So I'm just going to leave it the way that it is. That's not a great way to approach these things. You want to really look at it from the mindset of, okay, what's the best foot that I can place forward and how do I do that? All right. So projects that are actually worth talking about, that should be like your first level of thinking. So a couple ideas about this. We did this in our last cohort. One project that we built, and this is actually a project. And I guess I'll add this. It should not just only be projects that solve a problem. It should be projects to a certain degree that have some kind of level, whether low level or high level, some kind of way to relate to a business use case in some way. Because think about the audience that you're trying to show this project to. They're business individuals, right? Think about the average person who is, and I guess this should be a chapter now that I think about it. I didn't think about this. Think about who's in interview number one that's going to be seeing this stuff, right? It's not the technical manager, often not. It's not the person that is like the CTO of the company. Often it's the person in HR. And for the vast majority of them who are not technical in nature, because they don't need to be, their job function is to bring people to the interview that have a higher likelihood of being converted to employees, right? They don't know what infrastructure is and this and that tool and this and that library. They don't understand that algorithm. They don't know the difference between React and Angular or Java and C#. They don't need to know the difference. So for you, you need to start thinking in the terms of, how do I explain this in a technical capacity as well as a non-technical capacity? So many of y'all think about landing in interview number 3 before thinking about how you get through interviews number 1 and 2. So start thinking about that. What do I do to get better at landing interview number 1 instead of thinking about what's going to happen in interview number 3, where I can talk about all the technical stuff that I want to talk about? So that project needs to relate to that non-technical capacity and aspect. So what are ways to do that? That's the big question here. One example of a project that we built was an inventory tracking system for a mom and pop auto repair store that would keep track of inventory, and based on the flow of traffic, it would determine when something would run out of stock. And before it would run out of stock, it would automatically reorder merchandise for the repair shop from the manufacturer. So that way it never runs out of things, right? And so obviously you can't just say, well, keep 1,000 transmissions in the shop. Average mom and pop auto repair shop does not have that kind of space to order that much, right? So you have to think in terms of realisticness. And obviously you cannot have a static value for it to automatically reorder, because maybe they do 10 oil changes for every 1 transmission repair, right? So it wouldn't make sense to have the same static value of reordering oil at the same level as transmissions, because they would probably run out of things, right? So that's something to think about. And so that's a great project. And it can have an admin dashboard where they log in, they can see like based on the flow of traffic. Obviously you can mock all that data, but based on the flow of traffic, they would be able to see like the financials, expected revenue for the month, and la da da da. You can make all that work the way that you want. That dashboard doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles. And to be honest, a project like that, because it has such a strong business use case, it doesn't need to be the most cleanly designed thing in the world. It needs to be functional more than it needs to design. And the best part about this is it gives you so much to talk about within that interview process. Another example of a project, we built an AI facial recognition application that would lock workspaces. And based on the user trying to unlock it, it would take pictures of them and store it in a admin dashboard that would show failed attempts of getting in there if it was not the right user, or it would unlock the entire workspace for the right user. Again, this one is actually not as hard as it sounds. Both projects are not as difficult as they sound, if I'm being honest. Both projects are teams of cohort students. They were able to build that within 6 weeks. So if you're by yourself, maybe it'll take you 8 weeks to 12, give or take. But regardless, like, you'd learn a lot, or it just depends on how fast you run, right? Another example of a project like this. Now, this one was a fan favorite with the cohort, but it doesn't have a strong business use case. And that is the only issue that I have with this project. But it's a fun one. I like this idea a lot. But essentially, the idea was it is a macro calculator recipe generation application based on the items that you have in your fridge. It would generate recipes off of those items. If it developed a recipe that required some additional ingredients that you don't have that are like core ingredients, it would put that on a separate shopping list so that way you can go to the store and just get all the necessary ingredients without having to have a guesswork done, right? It would also produce all the macros for the meal that you're eating, so like your protein, fat, carbs, sugars, and all that good stuff. It would generate that macro list for you. So if you're someone that's trying to maybe bodybuild, or maybe you're in the focus of trying to get healthier, or maybe you're trying to avoid certain things, maybe you have what is it called? My mind's going blank on it. Where you can't have gluten. I forgot the exact name of that, unfortunately. But if you have gluten allergies, maybe you can put that in as a list of items that you can't have, and it will generate recipes based off of that, including the ingredients that you have in your fridge. Really great application. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of screens and flows. But the cool thing about this is a lot of people can relate to it. It just doesn't have that business use case that I like, but it's still a good application overall. But do you see how we're approaching this now? And here's the thing, we're solving a problem with this. Like, what is the food application solving? It's solving the issue of not knowing what to cook with staying in within my health and fitness goals, but also it's generating things that maybe I haven't tried before, but it's still in my comfort zone of recipes that I would want to try. Or the auto repair shop, prime example, what it's solving? It's solving having way too much inventory, increasing cash flow at the bottom line of the business, but also tracking what's going on. These are the types of things that will get you talking a lot about value within that interview process, which takes us to chapter number 5 of ways to stand out. This is the way to stand out. Having a project like this, going to a meetup, going into interview, going into a networking opportunity, that's a lot of value. That's a way to stand out. Other ways that you can stand out, honestly, and it's a big one as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the chapters later on. Volunteering, I think, is a great way to stand out. Working with others on a project is a great way to stand out. You can do stuff where it's like maybe you want to give back to your community in a way that maybe you're volunteering with a local charity, and so maybe you're maintaining the website for them. That experience would help you stand out, right? There's projects that you can build or initiatives that you can do that will make you stand out. Hackathons are a great way to stand out. Stuff like that. The other thing too is networking the right ways at the right events. Those are great ways to stand out. So maybe, for example, in Dallas, this last week was Dallas Startup Week, right? Where every single small business owner around was at this event. Now, would I want to go in there guns a-blazing, like, oh, I'm trying to get my first job in tech, can you hire me? No. Maybe that could be something that I hop into because it's free, right? It doesn't cost me anything to go there. But that could be something that was like, oh, I'm networking, I'm meeting people. I can pitch my service of freelancing here. I could go to my chamber of commerce. They have these events where all these business owners are. That could be a way that I could pitch something to them. Stuff like that would be. Freelancing is a great way to kind of do that and getting actual clients. That's a great way to stand out. So now going on to this next chapter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, LinkedIn. I think on this platform in particular, I can't imagine anyone speaking about LinkedIn more than I have over the last several years. I never thought I'd become the LinkedIn guy, but I guess I am now the LinkedIn guy, right? And I think it's for good reason. I think it's probably one of the most underutilized tools when it comes to uh, software developers. Mainly because think about this. Every recruiter, technical manager, etc., they live on LinkedIn, right? It's part of their job role. They have to be on there. If they were at the gym, I would tell you go pick out a workout routine. If they were at the bar, I'd tell you to pick up a drink. If they were at a restaurant, I'd say it's time to get dinner. You need to stand out where they hang out. It's as simple as that, right? I've said this for years and I continue to say it for years more. They're there. They're there because they want to find candidates, they want to network, they want to talk to people. Make it easier for them. Now, here's the thing. You have to have a well-structured profile. And the reason why I say this is LinkedIn has its faults like all social media platforms, right? But no other platform is poised in the way LinkedIn is to actually get people jobs, right? That's the big differentiator. And so on LinkedIn, they've released these stats themselves. And I've heard multiple variations of the stat over the years, but this is the true one. Every single minute on LinkedIn, 3 people land a job. Now, that's not focused on tech, that's just jobs in general, right? But every minute, 3 people land a job. That means every 20 seconds, one person is landing a job. I don't see why you can't be one of them, right? Like those stats are there, that proof is there, it's there, right? Now, a strong profile will do work for you even when you are not active on the platform. That is the whole point of it, right? So if you set up your profile the right way, you've got a strong experience section that you've put a lot of emphasis on. You put a strong feature section together. You have some things that showcase who you are and what you're about as a software developer. You got a strong profile photo and header section. You've got your volunteer experience there, all the good stuff. That's going to be a profile that helps you. And the reason why I say this is, think about this for a moment. When I DM someone on LinkedIn, or let's say someone DMs me on LinkedIn, what do you think is the very first thing someone does? It's not reply to the message. It's they go to that person's profile to figure out who they are and what they're about, right? So your profile, if it's structured correctly, actually helps increase the rates of replies that you get, as opposed to having cold messages with no feedback or no emphasis. So they learn more about who you are. And if your profile set up correctly, they say, you know what? I kind of like what Danny's about. Let me talk to him and find out more. That's a way that increases the rates of replies for you. So when a lot of people talk about getting ghosted all the time, this is a way that helps reduce that percentage of ghosting. Is it still going to happen? Of course. But that percentage drops drastically when you have some of that information on there. And no other profile in the world really does that for you, or platform in the world does that for you, besides LinkedIn. And the best part about that is your featured section is like a highlight reel. You can put anything there that you want that you think will help you convert people to having more conversations with you, right? Set it up the way that you think fits best. That's the perfect thing to do. If you need help with LinkedIn, I have the Tried and True LinkedIn series on YouTube. It is 100% for free. That 4-episode series, it's helped thousands of people at this point, thousands and thousands. I mean, I don't think there's anybody on any platform in the world that has helped more people land their first job in tech besides me, with the actual proof of it, right? Like the proof, man, the thousands of screenshots I have at this point of people saying that it's helped them get a job in tech. It's worth the view if you haven't seen it. Also, there's the LinkedIn learning course that I did. It's 33 minutes long. It doesn't replace the LinkedIn series as far as I'm concerned, but it gives you more specific things to focus on. 33 minutes, and it's completely for free. That was a special deal that we did with LinkedIn Learning to make sure that anyone can access it no matter where they are in the world without having to pay for LinkedIn Premium, because I know a lot of people can't afford that in certain parts of the world. It is completely free. It's not behind a paywall. You can watch that. It's 33 minutes. We record at LinkedIn Studios. It's a great video. I've heard a lot of good feedback. I think it has almost getting close. Last time I checked, I haven't checked in a while, but it's like at least at or past 5,500 students. And so it's there for you to take if you need that. Now, the other thing, resume. You got to have a good resume. There's no shortcut for that one, unfortunately. You got to do it. The biggest mistakes that I've seen as of late, when it comes to like reviewing the resumes, honestly, it's a couple. Really, really weak on explaining their experiences or achievements within a role. Prime example of this: if someone were to say that they were a software developer, I'm going to stay quiet for like 10 seconds. I want you to think, what are some of the things you expect that person to do within that role? Well, if you had to guess a couple things, it's write code, participate in code reviews, probably even doing something like uh, releasing new features, adding tests to the code, etc. Basic stuff, right? Why would you put that in the experience section? Participated in the code review. That does no value for you. I know to a certain degree that that's going to be a basic job function, right? Why are you not telling people the basic duties? I mean, the achievements that you had in your role instead of the basic duties. That one example that I often give is, what do you think when someone tells you that they're a cashier? You know, you rang up customers, that you bagged groceries. You even know to a certain degree that they even gave the receipt back, right? There's no reason why they should be telling anybody this in their resume, in the interview, or even on their LinkedIn. So think about that. What are you writing about your things? You were at this job for 4 years. You did something to show someone somewhere that you were great at your job. What was it? Talk about that. Bring that same enthusiasm that your supervisor or manager has for you in relation to that role. That should be what you're writing about. That should be what you're listing on those areas. So on your resume, start thinking about that. But the other thing you need to be thinking about, for me, my mindset has always been, how does my LinkedIn profile and my resume set me up before I'm in a conversation with this person? And how does it set me up for once I'm in the conversation with that person? If you approach your resume and LinkedIn profile the right way by over delivering on the information that you want to talk about, they will develop questions based on that resume, right? So if you're talking about how you help from a software developer's perspective, for example, let's say you talk about how you help them build a new newsletter feature on the homepage that we saw a 13% increase in customer conversion rates from viewers to newsletter recipients. You can talk about that now. How did you do this? Why do you know it was 13%? That gives you something to talk about. And so now, if you're in an interview and you're basically in this interview for the process of an hour, let's say, and 35 minutes of it, you're talking about things that you love and things that you've done and things that you're really knowledgeable on. Maybe 10 minutes, you're talking about a project that you built. That's 45 minutes. That's an interview that you're winning. How are you going to lose it at that point, right? But if you don't give them enough, because at the end of the day, here's what an interview is, which, I'm kind of jumping a chapter, but it kind of makes sense here. Interview is a fact-finding mission, right? The whole point of an interview is when people are ready to interview you, they're not hiring a private investigator like, hey, you know what? JC Smiley over here, he's applied for this role. Find out everything about him for me before I call him in here. No, they got your LinkedIn, they got your resume. That's it. So if you don't give them enough information to go off of, what do they do instead? They ask you generic questions that you may or may not know the answers to. And if you don't set yourself up for success, that's when interviews start getting really tough. And the other thing is, interviews are kind of set up in a way to be an interrogation, right? And it's not, I don't think people set it up that way intentionally. It's just the way of the nature of an interview. But as quickly as you can turn that interview into an organic conversation, that's an interview you win every single time. Your resume can help you kind of do that, right? So we've talked about resumes, we've talked about LinkedIn. We need to talk about one thing in particular that kind of revolves around different areas, and that's networking, right? You can network online, you can network virtually, you can network in person, you can network at networking events, you can network at meetups, you can network at pickleball, you can network at tennis, you can network anywhere, right? One prime example, I was at pickleball. I love pickleball. I play pickleball a lot, but I was at pickleball the other day and I literally met the CEO of a tech company out here. We were just talking, playing, and I mean, I think me several years ago, I would be very intimidated to just cold open with somebody about tech. But I just started talking to him, hey, I do this, so and so. What do you do? And he's like, oh, I'm a CEO of a tech company. And we started talking. Next thing you know, we're talking in DMs now, and we're talking about collaborating on something. You never know where one conversation would take you, right? So if you give yourself a compelling elevator pitch, you give yourself enough things to talk about that generates interest in other people, you're now in a situation where networking is a lot more organic and it feels better. But here's the other thing. Often people say, well, I don't have these things to talk about in networking. Brothers, sisters, they, thems, whatevers. This is your life. You get to decide how exciting or how dull it can be, how valuable it can be in conversations or how unvaluable it can be. You get to choose what you do. If you feel like you're missing things that can help you in that conversation, go do them. Go build them. Go be a part of it. Go volunteer. Go support others. Go get a team together and build something. You got your entire life to do this. The circumstances that you're born in are not the circumstances that you have to continue living the rest of your life with. It's up to you to make that differentiator and difference. But if you just want to be like, well, I don't have that to talk about, and then 6 months later when I talk to you again, you still say, well, I don't have anything I could talk about, you're choosing to have that at that point. You can make these things. Now, I'm not saying obviously you can make yourself a CEO of a company, but hell, you can say, oh, I've been volunteering at ABC Technology. They build websites for homeless shelters, and I'm over here building websites on the weekend. Boom, that's something you could talk about. You could talk about how you found this soup kitchen that's downtown in your city that gives food to the poor, and you built a website for them to take online donations. Boom, that's something you could talk about. So you can allow yourself to still be in the situation of not having value to talk about, or you can develop that value to talk about. It's up to you on that point. So if you find those networking situations not having a lot of value, time to hit the, get busy for a little bit and kind of get what you need going. I think that'll help and be valuable for you. All right. When to apply to jobs, right? This is one that I get a lot. When it comes to applying to jobs in particular, when should you apply to jobs? Actually, it's pretty easy. I genuinely believe if you match 50% of the job listing, that's a job you should apply. Do you know the core languages of what they're asking? Apply. Do you know like the basic, like if you read that job description, are you able to answer a lot of the questions that they have and ease their concerns? Apply. I promise you, apply. And if that job doesn't say senior developer on it, I think that's fair game to have a conversation, especially if you're trying to get your first job in tech. Apply. Worst case scenario, they say no. Best case scenario, they say yes. Or at the very least, you can have a conversation and kind of showcase the value that you have. I guarantee you at that point, people are going to be really into who you are and what you're about. Or at the very least, if it goes poorly, you got an experience that you applied, right? Apply. So when should you apply? 50% of the things that they're asking for. When should you apply? You've researched the market and you know the tech stack that you have is valuable within the market that you're in. That's when you should be applying, as far as I'm concerned. And you've got the skills to back it up. And you remove the buts from the conversation, right? You need to give them enough value for them to fall in love with who you are and what you're about. Simple as that. And I tell people all the time, if you bring value, they will bring their checkbook. Simple as that. No company in the history of the world has turned down an opportunity to kind of mentor somebody, or at least to a certain degree, not even mentor, but really bring them on in a capacity where it'll be a value add down the road. Some people think of like their junior dev job in the wrong light. Like every company in the world knows if they hire a junior dev for like 6 months, they're losing money at the very least, right? Like there's not going to be a ton of value that you can add early on. You're going to need a lot of hand holding, which takes away from like the senior developers and stuff. But they know, and you need to ease their concerns, and they see something in you to where they're like, after 6 months, I know Toby Lobo over here is going to add so much value that I know he's going to thrive and he's going to be way worth us having him on our team. And so he's worth that 6-month investment because I know he's going to produce so much value after that. That's what they think about. So you need to be able to ease that concern. All right. Volunteering. I'm big on volunteering. I volunteer all the time. I volunteered for years. Volunteering is one of the only things that you can do in your life that give you a win-win-win scenario. Win, you get to add it on your resume, and volunteer experience never expires. So you can talk about that forever, right? Win, you're helping out your local community, right? What's another win? Think about the people that are volunteering on average. It's not just people that just have amazing hearts, which a lot of them are, but there are other professionals that want to give back to their community. It allows you to network and it gives you something to talk about. So think about it. Oftentimes, because I'm big on volunteering, whenever I'm checking out LinkedIn profiles of people to network with, what do? I look at some of their past volunteer experience. And I'm like, oh, you volunteered here? So have I. I volunteered here last year, actually. What was your experience like? Boom. Opens up conversation. Oh, you volunteered here? I haven't volunteered yet. It's actually on my list of things that I want to do because I love the mission. Can you tell me about your experience there? Boom. You're having a conversation. it's giving you more to talk about. So think about that when it comes towards volunteering. It's not just helping people, which it is. I love giving back, but there's so many other additional wins with it that it just makes it worth it. Plus, to be honest, I genuinely believe volunteering to a certain degree, it's kind of infectious. Like I've been doing it for years. I can't see myself ever stopping. My kid is starting to get into it now. Like it's a great way for the whole family to kind of come together, support the community, give back. But also, I remember, growing up, I grew up in the projects of Brooklyn, New York. Like I remember what a lot of those organizations did for our community. So like I kind of am into that. I think it's really valuable. Now, whew, I spoke really a lot. We've covered so much in such a short period of time. I know y'all. Just out of curiosity, I'm just looking through the thing. Give me any kind of emoji. If you press the heart with the plus icon on it on your screen, you should see like a bunch of emoji icons. Show me the 100 emoji if you can. If you think you've gotten some value out of the space so far, I'm just trying to get a gauge at this point. Go ahead, hit those emojis for me. And I think one thing, and we got over 200 people in here, right? You could be anywhere in the world this Saturday morning. I'll be honest with you. I appreciate y'all. I mean, Sunday morning. Dang, I forgot what day of the week was. You could be anywhere this Sunday morning. You decide to hang out with me, and hopefully it's worth your time and value. I see all the emojis, so I know it's going right. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. All right. This is a very serious point. I have never seen in my life more people lose job opportunities in this market because they haven't done this one thing. It's actually been pretty interesting to see from my perspective. I've never seen more people lose an opportunity because they haven't showcased leadership skills outside of the basics of their job role. That has been a big one. I have never seen this before. So many people. And there a lot of these, we'll say recruiters, we'll say maybe non-technical managers, they're really looking for people that are showing their skills outside of the role and context of, they were helping like one prime example actually I'm thinking about now. One person was just graduated college, but because she had put on her resume that she was president of an association, they looked at her more favorably than another candidate. You're seeing that more and more. So please try and find some way to have on your resume a section and I didn't used to add this before, but I'm adding it now. A section that is called leadership and achievements. Put all your awards there. Put all your leadership attributes there, things that you've done outside of a job role or outside of like your experience section that would showcase that you're a leader. Now more than ever, especially in 2024, probably going even into 2025, that's something you need on your resume. I know a lot of resume people won't advocate for that. I don't know why, but right now, like I'm seeing it. And the best part about that is that will almost 100% set you up for the right questions in an interview process. So you need to think about that. What are the right questions in the interview that you want to be asked, right? And that can kind of set you up for that. By the way, I know everybody's showing those emojis. If you got some value out of the space, I've recorded this space. I don't ever really record these, but I recorded today's. Retweet it, share it, so that way other people can get that same help that they're looking for, especially if you thought this was valuable. Or if you want to listen to it later, because it's recorded, so later on, you can kind of listen to it almost like a podcast where you scroll back forth, this and that. We're almost hitting like 225 people in here. That's wild. But regardless, you're in here because hopefully you're getting something out of it. Maybe you can help others do the same thing. So please, leadership skills outside of a role, you got to have that on your resume right now. Especially if you're trying to get your first job in tech, like you really need to have it on there, showcasing like why you're a more safer hire. But also from their perspective, they're going to look at it from like the perspective of like, oh, they're going to take ownership of their role. They're going to really be thinking about that, et cetera, et cetera. All right, interviewing. What chapter are we on now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13, if I read this correctly. If you're confused about the whole chapter aspect, I pinned the tweet at the top. That's going to have all the quote unquote chapters for today, every section that we've hit. We're at now interviewing. So the interviewing section, basically we're going to talk about a couple strategies. Number one, we've kind of already talked about it. It's someone's asking, can I post this on YouTube? No, It's going to be here. I'll probably do another video on YouTube with visuals, but probably not this long. I mean, hour and a half, it's kind of long for YouTube. But regardless, interviewing. We've already talked about one strategy. It's how it's setting you up before you're in the conversation and how you're in the conversation, right? The other thing that you need to be thinking about when it comes to interviewing in general is one big thing here. When it comes to the interview itself, you need to think about what are the moments that are going to be like your home runs. Or for those that know cricket, what are going to be the moments that are your sixes, right? Like when you're hitting it out of the stadium, past the barriers. What are those moments for you, right? The difference between a good interview and an average interview is about 3 to 4 very strong 10-second moments. That's it. And what's funny is that analogy is what I use not just for interviewing but public speaking. The difference between a good a good talk and an average talk are those 3 to 4 really strong 10-second moments where someone can walk away and be like, you know what? I remember this part. I love this part. And that may be the part that they reference to others, they talk about with others, et cetera, et cetera. You need to think about that. What are those 10-second moments for you? And so sometimes it takes you thinking about what those are, maybe even adding a pause after you say that moment so that way it really stands out, and then getting back into the conversation. The other thing is you need to think about your strategy going into interview number 1, because that strategy is not going to be the same strategy that you utilize for interview number 2 and interview number 3. They're completely different. They're not the same ones. Strategy number 1, what are you doing in interview number 1? You're talking to someone who is basically filtering out applicants that may not necessarily be the right fit. They're going to be looking more for the behavioral side of things. They're looking for things that more along the lines of a culture fit or just a general fit with the company. They don't know anything technically for the most part, not always, but for the most part. They're going to be someone who is in a capacity that's like the average person that you see in HR, right? They're not technical. So if you go into interview number 1 talking about how you were able to speed up AWS services by doing this, this, and this, and you built this entire architecture, and they don't know what the heck you're talking about. But now if you're saying, I actually built this project with the company that sped up the service by 100% and reduced the cost of the company by 50%, those are metrics that they understand. That's a problem that you solved, and they understand the solution, they conceptualize it. The other thing that you need to think about at each stage of the interview process, a lot of people don't think about this. I don't know why, by the way. Here's how the interviews work, especially interview number 1. They interview you. They're taking notes as they interview you, right? And in that process of taking notes, after the interview, they will leave their conclusion and their recommendation of whether they think interview number 2 should interview you or not. Interview number 2 is looking at said notes and looking at that recommendation, and then they're deciding for themselves like what they're going to call them in or not, right? If you're not giving interview number 1 enough value and context for them to understand and for them to be like, you know what, I'm taking notes in such a way that interview number 2 is going to get excited about this, you're doing yourself a disservice. So you need to start thinking about them. What do I write or what do I say that gets them to write everything that I need them to kind of conceptualize and know, and to get them to start advocating for me, because they're going to have a conversation with this person when I'm not in the room. What do I say that gets them to advocate for me for in that aspect? Start thinking about that. That's a strategy you should be utilizing. Now, when I'm in the interview process, you can use STAR method is really common. People use that a lot. You can look that up. There's a whole lot of details on STAR method online now. But the other thing that I like to do is I like to turn the interview from an interrogation to a conversation as quickly as possible. Now, you must, I didn't used to think this until maybe 4 years ago. You must ask questions in the interview process. You got to do it. You have to do it. There's no way around that one in particular. You have to do it. And the reason why is there was a study that was done that showed like 87% of interviewers basically said if a candidate did not ask questions in an interview, they believe that candidate was not actually interested in the role, which is wild, because I wouldn't be sitting in the dang chair getting interrogated if I wasn't interested in the role. But that's how they feel. So you got to play the game the way that they need it if you want to get a job, right? You have to ask questions in an interview. And so very often I find myself in a situation where I will not at the end, because often at the end they always say, Danny, do you have any questions for me? You can ask them now. I ask them in real time back and forth to where now they're qualifying themselves to me at the same time as them qualifying themselves as I'm qualifying myself to them. Because for me, especially now, it took me a while to learn this. I look at the interview process as we're figuring each other out. And if you've listened to some of my podcasts early on or some of the interviews I've done in the past, I turned down 6 jobs before ever accepting my first job in tech. Now, I'm not telling you to do that, but I was very picky. I was already depressed at the gas stations, right? I don't want to trade one depression for another. I wanted the right fit. I wanted the right opportunity. I wanted the right company I could grow with and do well with, right? So I was very, very picky with that interview process. And I'm glad I did, because I truly believe my first job in tech catapulted me to the levels that I needed to be at, right? So think about that. What are you doing? What are you saying? And how are you positioning yourself to kind of talk about yourself in that interview process? But also, what are you doing and asking them where they're now no longer interrogating you, but now they're responding to you? And I will give you one of my absolute most favorite questions to ask. I hate giving it out because it's like such a good, strong secret weapon, but it has done so well over the years. And a lot of my students have used this and they have also said it's done well. So don't abuse this question, y'all. Don't tweet about this question either. We don't need the whole world figuring it out and like recruiters being like, oh, you got this question from Danny, right? Use this wisely. My favorite question to ask in an interview has always been, what do you see as success for this role 6 months from now? What do you see as success for this role 6 months from now? Meaning, if you hired somebody for this role and in 6 months from now you were gauging whether or not they were successful at it, this is the things that you would see on that list. What would that be? Almost every single time I've ever asked that question, I've always heard, wow, that's a really good question. And they start thinking like deeply about that. And then they start giving me the answers. And what do I do with those answers? The second I walk out of that room, I write every single one of those items down in my notepad. And the reason why is they just gave you for free the entire roadmap of what your first 6 months should look like. And then when you knock those out of the park, guess who's getting like a favorable situation in the yearly review? You've already killed it at 6 months. So now your next 6 months can be whatever it is that you need to do. Boom, you've already superseded expectations. So guess who gets the raise, the promotion, et cetera, et cetera. That sets you up. So that's honestly the reason why in my first job in tech, I was promoted within the first 3 months, and then I was promoted again at 6 months. And then the year and a half mark, they were going to promote me again, but I ended up leaving for another company at that point. That helped me out tremendously, and it gives you things to negotiate with in that yearly review process. That's something you need to think about. Now, don't abuse that question, y'all. That question that's a powerful question. It's one of my favorites. Don't abuse it to where the whole world learns about it, then we can't use it anymore, right? So think about that going forward. Okay. And then someone just said this, and I was literally, I kid you not, I was just about to say this. I typically want to, at the end of the interview, have no questions left except when do I start? Because I've already asked them all. That is literally verbatim what I was about to say. They don't have a name, but it's just simple with their name and Radamix. But that's basically what I do, the same thing. Oftentimes by the end of the interview, they say, Dan, do you have any questions for me? Which I'll jokingly like do a lighthearted laugh saying, I feel like I've asked you 75 questions that you've already answered already. And so I just want to know, what do I need to do now to keep the ball rolling in the right direction? That's basically how I end almost every single interview. And you'll see them laugh, smile with me, and then we'll continue. I ask questions throughout the whole interview process. Or sometimes they'll give me a question, I'll answer it, and I'll end it in a question itself, so that way they're qualifying back. That's been very successful. All right. So let's say at this point, you've done everything that we've set up to this. You've killed the interview process. They fell in love with you because you're amazing. We know you're amazing, and that you've done the job of showing it to them as well, and you got the job. So now this goes on to the chapter of landed a job. Now what? All right. You landed a job. There's a lot that needs to happen, right? Obviously, you have to go through the basic processes, but you need to do, and I'm going to combine, I guess, the next chapter with this, which is called the 4 things that you need to do within the first 6 months of your role, right? And that is code base, processes, team, and value. These are the 4 things that you need to focus on within the first 6 months of your role to really kill it. Everyone needs to learn their code base. Now, when I say learn your code base, I'm not thinking in the terms of you need to memorize every single line of code. No one's going to do that, right? But you need to get it to the point where if we're in a team meeting and I'm saying, hey, we need to work on this feature. And in this feature, XYZ needs to be adjusted. You can conceptually think about what components that may revolve around. Oh, we need to fix the newsletter feature. Well, I know the newsletter feature has a API that is attached to and that sends the information to the backend, which sends it to the database. I know how that process is working, so we can kind of talk about that. I can size up the tickets that we're going to be going on and stuff like that. So learning that code base is very paramount. Now, one thing you can do to help you out with this, and this is what I have basically all my interns do and all my junior devs do. You need to follow a method that, especially if you find the code base intimidating because like millions of lines of code and so big and you don't know how to approach it, approach it from the aspect of the follow the rabbit hole method. And essentially the idea is, let's say you're given a task to fix a button on the front end page of the website, right? Cool. You fix this button. A lot of juniors and interns will fix that button and immediately try and run back, giving the ticket back to grab a new ticket. There's nothing wrong with that. But what if you just took an additional hour, right? Just an additional hour. And in that hour, you were looking at, okay, when I push this button, what happens? It's attached to this service here. The service is passing through this thing called middleware. I don't really know anything about middleware. As it's passing through middleware, it's saving this information here and it's processing it here in order to go to this external API that's attached to another project that I haven't ever seen before, but I know it's doing something with that information. Just because you spent that extra hour following that rabbit hole, you've learned so much about things that you didn't even have to initially touch. And over time of you doing that over and over and over again, within 6 months, how deep into that code base do you think you're going to be? How much knowledge are you going to have about all the things revolving around the components that you've touched will you have? You're going to be far more knowledgeable by the 6 month mark than ever any other junior dev going into that role, especially if they're just focusing on the immediate tasks at hand. So code base, paramount. Second value add is processes. When I say processes, I don't just mean the process in your code base, which obviously you do need to know, but other processes. Like for me, I had never worked in corporate environment before landing my first job in tech, right? So I didn't have any concept of what was a product owner, what was a product manager, what is a scrum master, why do they just pretend to work all day? No, never mind, I'm joking. But why? What are these roles and what do they do and how does it relate to me? What is agile? I'd never heard of that before. What is prime example? Like I remember my first team meeting, they're saying, Danny, we t-shirt size our tickets. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What did you just say? That doesn't connect with me. And they're like, Danny, here's this ticket. What do you think this is gonna be? I was like, I don't know, a double XL. I didn't know what I didn't have a clue how to size the tickets, right? So for those that aren't familiar, you would size tickets like a 1, 2, 3, depending on the company, like 5, 8, 13, right? And that would basically show the complexity of how long or how hard this task would be. I didn't ever hear of those terms before. So getting familiar with those processes early on, really valuable. Then the third one is team. You need to be figuring out what your team dynamics are and how they relate to you. More than likely, as a junior dev, you're going to be getting someone who's like your immediate point of contact. You need to know who that is, whether that's the team lead itself, whether that's a senior dev that they tell you to reach out to first, whether there's like a middle level dev, a mid dev that they tell you to contact first before going to the senior. There's going to be processes there within your team. You need to know who they are. But also, you need to also understand the team dynamic and who is your manager. What is the role of your manager in relation to you? So, prime example, I've worked at one company where if you had any technical problem, the manager was not the person to go to. He didn't have a clue. But then I worked in my last company, AutoZone, and if you had a technical problem, that manager was ready to jump on a call with you in a moment's notice because he knew everything about the technical capacities of what the team was doing. That's not going to be every single company that you work at, right? It's different. You need to learn what that dynamic is. Also, I implore you to please think about who your director is and try to set up
skip level meetings, maybe like every 6 months, every quarter, something like that. So that way they get visibility into what it is that you're doing. So that way they start becoming a fan of who you are. And truthfully, they end up advocating for you when it comes times to raises and promotions. That's probably been like one of the most successful things that I did. And I remember even at my last company, my manager said, I've never had anybody request skip level meetings the way that you do. But guess who was the first person to advocate for my raise, but who was also the person to advocate for me getting a larger bonus than the rest of my team, but who was also the person that when I decided to finally give him my notice, they tried to beat my current offer before anybody else even thought about trying to beat it. Unfortunately, they couldn't. My director's a badass, though. I love him. And I'll always keep him in my like network of people to connect with. But nobody else is doing that. We've had other people leaving the org where they didn't bat an eye, but luckily for me, I guess I made an impact to where they recognized that they wanted to keep me around. That only comes through transparency and visibility, right? If you're not being visible, no one's gonna know. You could be the best developer in the world, and if nobody knows it, nobody could advocate for you in that regard. So think about that. The last point is value on this chapter. This chapter, we're talking about value, right? What does value mean? This was how I got the very first promotion that I ever got in tech. And this was at the basically the 3-month mark. And essentially the idea was I was going through the website, not just as the developer, but as the customer that goes through the website. I noticed that I didn't have a clue. The company was a company called Front Door. Essentially the idea was they sold like insurance products for the house, but not like home insurance, but like for your appliances and stuff like that. I'd never heard of that stuff before. It was interesting. But regardless, I went through the website through the mindset of the actual consumer customer that we're servicing, right? And by the end of the checkout process, I realized I don't know what the heck I'm buying. And I presented my findings in the meeting and I offered a solution that I thought would be great. I ended up being able to spearhead that project 3 months in. And because of that, I ended up obviously getting a promotion and a nice little tiny little bonus. It wasn't nothing to brag about, but it was a bonus and I was proud of that, right? That's corporate America though. Like that's just it is what it is. But regardless, I got a bonus. It was cool. And I was really proud of that, right? I only ever got that because I started trying to think of what does the value exist for my team in relation to the product that we're building. And I would just constantly go through it over and over and over again. That led me to a lot of successful things. And I think anybody, if you're building something, you need to understand what the value is of that product, the value is of your team specifically to the company, and how can you increase or improve that value. If you do that, you're going to start finding yourself rising up the ranks as far as I'm concerned. It's hard to not notice stuff like that. All right. Next chapter, reading code and understanding it. If you were here at the beginning of the space, and if you weren't, I'll kind of paraphrase what happened. But essentially, I did a one-on-one call with somebody who was a junior dev. They were 2.5 years into their role. And one of the comments that this person made in the call was, I'm reading some code and I'm just intimidated by it. I'm very intimidated. And I don't approach it. They were given a task on Friday, and essentially they were told that this was going to be make or break for them, whether they're going to be kept around in the company or not, right? And they were so nervous by this. And I had the call with them Monday night, right? So it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday night. And basically they were told on Friday, your success on this task is whether we keep you here or we fire you, essentially. Now, I'm not one that says you need to work on the weekends and la. But if somebody tells me my job is on the line and like this is going to determine whether I'm staying at the company or not, I'm going to be working that whole weekend to make sure that I have a job after this task is done, right? Simple as that. And especially like if my team lead is saying this to me after 2.5 years, obviously like I'm missing something to where they're trying to either get it out of me or they're going to determine, yeah, there's just no way Danny's going to add value, right? But regardless, this person was given this task. And Monday night comes along, so I asked them the question, like, what have you done so far with this task? Like, obviously, and the reason why I asked that in particular was Tuesday morning, this person was going to have this conversation with their team lead to kind of go over it, right? Well, this person said that they had built a flow chart to show where the data is flowing. And I was like, a flow chart? A flow chart takes like an hour, 2 hours to build? Like, I mean, the whole thing had maybe 20 symbols on it at the most. That's not a 4-day task. Like that doesn't show me effort for the 4 days. What did you do outside of those 2 hours? And they just stared at the screen, right? And they said, this code base is so big and this task is so intimidating. I'm just intimidated by it. I don't know what to do. I was like, well, have you asked anybody anything? Have you reached out? And they were just quiet. I'm like, you're 2.5 years into a role and you don't know if you've been stuck on a task for like an hour or something. You should probably reach out to somebody, but you haven't. So you haven't made any progress. So when you're reading code, you need to understand it. And one task that I often give my juniors is, as you're reading the code, make comments for yourself. Do not commit those comments, but make comments as you're reading saying, okay, this 3 lines is doing this and it's communicating with this service. This 3 lines here is doing XYZ. This form is being processed in this way. That way now, if you were to collect all the comments of the code that you read and put it on like a Google Doc, you have an entire, maybe a couple paragraphs that you can read through that explains that entire component to you. Now you understand everything that's going on. Well, when I was doing this exercise with this person on the call, even though they've been in this role for 2.5 years, this was like a crazy moment for them. And they're seeing in real time how much we were able to do in 20 minutes on a call that honestly was probably worth more value than the quote unquote flow chart that they made in those 4 days. So think about that. Read the code, break it down, and understand what you're reading. Now, I don't ever expect somebody to read code and then for the rest of their life, they've memorized that code. Truth be told, and I'll tell you this, there are times where I commit like a merge request, and when QA gets to me like 2 weeks later and they're like, hey, what does this code do? I'm like, hell, I don't remember what I wrote. That was 2 weeks ago. You should have asked me that within a day or two of me submitting that merge request for you to test, not 2 weeks later. So then I got to reread the code and re-understand what I did. Simple as that. But when you read code, you need to understand it. If you don't understand it, you need to ask. Now, you shouldn't be the person that if you were to come to me, right? You're on my team, you come to me and you ask me a question about some component and I answer it and you go back and then the next day you come to me and ask me the same question. I almost feel like you didn't pay attention when we spoke, right? So if you're in the conversation and you find yourself still not understanding, ask, take notes. There's nothing wrong with taking notes in real time to utilize later on. There's no shame in that. So ask and take the notes that you need so that way you can thrive, right? Now, we're in the last 3 chapters, right? This chapter is a brag book. I truly believe at the end of every week on a Friday, you need to think of, okay, if my director were to ask me a question about what I did that week, they're going to say, what did you do this week? I should have 1 or 2 things that I can say very impactfully, like, this is what I did this week, right? I shouldn't just be like, I don't know. Whatever that is, whatever those answers are, write it down somewhere, whether it's an Obsidian, Notion, Google Docs, whatever. The reason why I say this is at the end of the year, when it's yearly review time, it takes me about roughly 5 minutes to make my yearly review. But if you are in a situation where you haven't kept that, like a lot of my coworkers, it would take them weeks to make the review. They will be so nervous about it. They don't know what to write. They don't know what to do. For me, I've got the whole document for me already set to go. So keep that brag book. And it helps out when you're talking with, like, let's say, for example, in a skip level meeting, your director's like, what have you been a part of? Boom, I'll list out everything on that brag book. I did this, I did that, I did that. Boom, helps you out in a lot, right? Which also goes into the next chapter of reviews. Every company you work at is going to have some kind of review process, right? Having that brag book is going to help you on those reviews instead of you scrambling at the last minute. And I guarantee you, if you scramble at the last minute, you've forgotten a good 90% of what you've done throughout the year. You probably remember some of the big moments, but that might be about it. So that weekly achievement thing will help you out in the review process as well. Also, when it comes to reviews in general, you should be thinking of, how is this review setting you up for success? Because usually at the end of the review, they're like, what are some of your goals for the following year? When you don't keep a brag book, it's really hard to keep track of that. But when it comes to the review process in general, that brag book will kind of give you a gauge of what you should be making your goals for the next year going. Now, the last chapter is one-on-ones. This is one of my favorite ones. This chapter, one-on-ones in particular, I feel like is a tool a lot of people do not use in the right concepts, right? Or the right steps. One thing that you should be doing in your one-on-ones in particular is I love having a living document between me and my manager. And what I do with that document is every one-on-one, I think one-on-ones are one of the most valuable tools you can utilize. I will never talk about something I'm actively working on now. If they ask me a question about that, the one thing that I often do is I redirect them saying, hey, we can talk about that at stand up, or we can set up another meeting for that. I'd really like to talk about how I can progress as a developer and grow within the company. I don't look at this as the idea of us just getting status updates, right? This is not what this time is for. This, for me, my one-on-one is extremely valuable. I don't want to give that up for something else. So let's keep this on topic. But at the end of the one-on-one, let's say I got some action items or something from my manager, like, hey, I'd really like you to do this. I will make check boxes with that action item. And then when we go for our next one-on-one, I'll tell my manager, hey, let's open up the doc and kind of go over what we went over in the last one-on-one. And then he'll say, oh, yeah, we had these action items. Did you do this? Yes, I did that. And I make him check it off. And then I'll say, oh, you did that? Yeah, I did that. Have him check it off. Then at the end of the year, when it's review time, and we're looking at that one-on-one document, he can easily scroll through and see all the action items he gave me throughout the year that were checked off and done. It's a win at that point. It's an overwhelming win. He knows firsthand what I did throughout the whole year. Everything went well. Everything went great. Plus, I can just look at those action items that we accomplished throughout the year and just copy that into my review. And that there you go. I'm set up for that promotion, that raise, all the good stuff. The other thing is my one-on-ones, and a lot of people don't do this. And actually, this reminds me of a conversation I had with an ex-engineer from Twitter, where he was passed up several times for being a tech lead. And I remember the last time I said, let's jump on a call. And we were talking, and I said, why do you think you're passed up? He's like, well, my manager said it's because I don't have this, which was like, I'm not showing enough initiative. And I'm like, well, how is he quantifying that? What is he seeing? What is telling him that? He's like, he doesn't know. And I'm like, that's the problem with obscure goals. And in my one-on-ones, I would be asking, is there anything blocking me from a potential rise of me getting the role of tech lead? And if you were to say, well, you're not showing enough initiative, it's like, cool, let's talk about that and let's figure out how I can show that. Would initiative be starting up 2 company projects? Would that be initiative? Would initiative be me working on 3 additional features that are outside of my immediate tasks? Like, what does that mean? And so now he has to think of what would quantify and prove to both of us that I'm showing enough initiative. That is one thing a lot of managers and others struggle at, is quantifying that. And so once they do, it's now a goal you can both hit. Because when you leave someone with an open-ended goal or feeling, that's not going to help a lot of people, right? But when you can quantify and now it's an achievable goal that you can both measure, both of you can know whether you hit it or not, right? So you need to use those one-on-ones as a way to figure out what it is that could be preventing you from getting to that next level. And if they say, hey, I want to see you have more initiative, cool. What does that mean? Give me an idea. Give me a quantifiable number of metric to hit. Oh, I need you to be part of more code reviews. Cool. Let's say I'll be part of, let's say 30 more code reviews before the next review. That way we can know, hey, I've hit that metric, right? That's kind of where you need to re-guide your manager to. The other thing is, I always start every job and every role with one thing. I start my first ever one-on-one setting the expectations to my manager of what I need from them. It shouldn't just be what does my manager need from me. It's like I need stuff too in order to be really good and valuable in my role. And so my very first one-on-one will always set the tone. Hey, I do really well with very blunt, to the point, and direct feedback. Don't sugarcoat it for me, right? I don't really care about you making me feel good with bad feedback as much as I care about what was the actual feedback and what are the metrics I need to hit in order to change this feedback. That's what I really need. And every manager I've ever had has done that for me. And I think that's been a big reason why I can progress. Like, I remember one time my manager said, hey, Danny, this is a moment where I think you can grow as a developer. I haven't seen you really participate in a lot of the testing meetings where they talk with QA and developing like automated tests, but also how they're testing it. I would really like to see you participate in those. After that, that's all I need to know. Boom, every single meeting. Hey, how are you testing this? Hey, what is happening here? Boom. What ended up happening? My biggest feedback from my manager, Danny, wow, you really stepped up. Boom, bonus time. Simple as that, right? That's how you grow on the road. You got to, some of this stuff is really growing as a developer. And some of it's corporate America, corporate whatever country you're in, right? You need to play the game that they have. And if you play it right, you're the one that ends up winning at the end of the day. So think about those things. Normally, I cap these spaces at an hour. Today, we can see that we've gone to 90 minutes. Definitely a big jump. So I'm going to say one last thing, and it's not a chapter. Well, actually, two last things. Before I say the last thing, I want to give one shout out to me and the Dallas Software Developer Group. We are doing a conference. If you haven't seen me talk about it, it is a conference for charity, completely free. Well, let me say that it's not, well, it can be free theoretically, but essentially the idea is every ticket sale that we make, it's going to go straight to charity, right? So tickets are going to be like $30 instead of like $600, $700, $900 that you see at some conferences. But it's going to have the option of, if you want to donate more, you can. But every single penny of ticket sales will go to charity. And for sponsorship money, we're only getting enough sponsorship money to help cover food costs for the event, so that way people can have food. I think we all know $30 barely covers food for 2 days for anybody, right? Especially nowadays, a Big Mac meal is like $15, it feels like. But we're trying to get food for everybody. We have, I think, already like 20 plus confirmed speakers. We're trying to get more. We're doing 3 tracks, a track on JavaScript, Java, and cloud. So if you're in America, or you can travel to America and you want to come to Dallas, we'd love to have you there. We're aiming for November. With enough resources, hopefully we're going to have a virtual option as well, so everyone can get access to the information, and that will be free with an option to donate. I don't want to list the charities yet, because half of them have half agreed, but I want full confirmations. One charity, I guess I can, one nonprofit I can say that we're going to be giving to, since it's already been confirmed with them, Free Code Camp. We're going to give a portion of the sponsorship money, the charity money that we get, to Free Code Camp to continue helping people learn how to code for free. But there are other charities that we're going to be giving money to as well. I love Free Code Camp. Truth be told, I wouldn't even be here without Free Code Camp. So big one there. But we'd love for you to be a part of this, whether it's attending, or if you're like a seasoned speaker, we'd love to have you speak at the event as well. Especially if you're in the cloud or Java space. I feel like we're at the point where we have more than enough JavaScript speakers for the 2 days, but there's going to be workshops and all the good stuff. I don't think workshops will be virtual. That's going to be probably way too hard to do in a virtual capacity, but everything else will probably be virtualized. So be on the lookout for that. That's going to be like November 6th and 7th, I think. Those dates are subject to change, but more than likely it's going to be the dates that we stick to. But yeah, and if you're wanting to give back, I know you could definitely help impact some lives with that, right? So I'm excited for this one. I've never seen a conference do it before in this capacity. I don't know if it's going to be a one-off or an every year thing. I think we need to figure that one out whenever after it happens, because I know that's been asked twice now. But I'm not sure if we're going to do it every single year, but I do know I'm excited for the 1 year that we do it, where it can help change some lives and hopefully at the end of the day really make an impact. If you want to support that, I've got tweets below that kind of showing that as well. Would love for you to, show any support to that and all the good stuff. And the last thing I want to say, even though it's not a chapter, believe me when I say this, y'all, you absolutely got this. I know it's difficult. I know it's tough, but you absolutely got this. This is 90 minutes of me running my mouth, but hopefully you got some value out of it. Y'all, thank you so much for hanging out. I'll see you at the next one. Goodbye, everybody.